Story 1. I said I wanted to be a teacher. He replied that I should be more realistic. He has passed away, and I am now a deputy head. Story 2. In the 1990s, an older male teacher struck another student's hands with a ruler on the desk after he misbehaved. We all gasped in shock, as we had never witnessed anything like this before. The teacher then instructed us to close our mouths or he would find a way to make our open mouths useful. He was fired 2 days later. Several years after that, he died from an alcohol addiction. None of us middle schoolers understood the seriousness of his threat. But as an adult, I now realize he was unsettling. Story 3. Nothing comes to mind except for my high school algebra teacher, who exploded on one of our classmates, Tom, for not knowing the answer and made him break down in tears. The teacher was fired a couple of weeks later when he did it again. Story 4. In kindergarten, my teacher held a coloring competition. I took a lot of time using crayons to color within the lines. She looked at mine and called it scribble. I still feel resentment towards her 30 years later. Story 5. I horseback rode seriously throughout grade school and high school and once had a bad fall at a competition, which resulted in a concussion that forced me to sit out gym class. I disliked gym. I was active on my own time and participated in many sports, but gym class was particularly difficult, and my 10th grade physical education teacher seemed to have it out for me. When I sat out due to my concussion, he went on a rant about how I thought I was a diva, how I was too good for class, and how only undesirable individuals horseback rode instead of playing a real sport. It was appalling. I dropped the class and never earned my diploma because I didn't complete the physical education requirement. Story 6. In 8th grade, my teacher told me I would never get a boyfriend because I am too tall. I ended up liking girls anyway. Story 7. I told her I thought I broke my foot in gym class, and she didn't believe me. I did break a bone in my foot. I was 12. Story 8. You didn't make that. I bet your dad made it for you. In fact, I had made it, but I still got docked points. Story 9. I had a long bus ride to high school every morning, and I would arrive 30 minutes before class to read fantasy books. The Lord of the Rings, says Lewis Xanth novels, whatever the school library had. One day, my teacher, Ms. Jones, told me before class that I should get my head out of reading books because it would never be helpful in my life. She was unkind, yet I have since run a successful nonprofit theater group that connects adults in a drug and alcohol-free safe space while we play role-playing games, exploring themes and navigating complicated situations and relationships as characters. I write the main plot and we roll from there. She said it to be mean, like the day she told me I would be happier if I just gave up on life. Now I help people make sense of madness and bring them joy. Story 10. You are less knowledgeable than the student involved in drug dealing, who was arrested yesterday. Thank you, Mrs. W., for making me dislike English class in my sophomore year. Story 11. I guess you just couldn't get that last point as she handed me back my comprehensive standardized test score in the 99th percentile. I wonder where my paralyzing perfectionism comes from. Story 12. I think I was about 10 or 11 years old at the time, and we were on a field visit to an agricultural education center. I was stroking one of the animals when one of the teachers, worried I might catch something, tried to call me away from it. The teacher next to her said, I wouldn't worry. It's not like anyone would miss her. Story 13. My calculus teacher often said unkind things. At one point, I started falling behind and stopped turning in homework. I thought I finally understood the material, so I raised my hand to ask a question. He didn't call on me, and after 10 minutes, I said, I have a question. He replied, maybe I'll answer your questions when you start trying in this class. Later, I still didn't understand what he was teaching, so I created my own formulas that worked, though they weren't in the book. I received no praise. I even devised a formula for the nth derivative, which was not particularly useful, but it worked, still no acknowledgement. Eventually, I was named Student of the Month, and he asked, who did you have to bribe? Later, we had a candy sale, and I didn't sell a single piece. As the school year was coming to an end, he asked us to bring in our money and any leftover candy. I had a lot of leftover candy and informed him, but he looked really disappointed. I knew I was failing. I had received a C in the first semester, so I needed at least a D to avoid jeopardizing my college admission. Knowing he would likely fail me based on the candy sale, I bought all the candy with my own money but lied about it, claiming I hustled to sell every piece. His face lit up, and he said, "That's so great. You know what? You're getting a D." Story 14. I did not want to take typing. The typing teacher told me, "You are going to have to know how to type when you are a secretary for a chief executive officer or president of a company." Story 15. After struggling the whole semester in Mathematics 20, I studied hard and spent hours doing chapter reviews, ultimately acing the final exam. The teacher, who was also our principal, called me into his office, accused me of cheating, and strongly suggested I not take Mathematics 30. My reply was, "How do you cheat at math?" I took the easier Mathematics 33 the next year and finished with a grade of 98%. I then went to college and upgraded to Mathematics 30, which I also passed. I never understood why a teacher would try to dissuade a student from reaching higher. Story 16. A little backstory. I have dyslexia, and it affects me significantly. I was always in the lowest reading groups in class. This was in the 1980s, and I was only diagnosed in high school. However, I have excellent listening skills. To this day, my wife is amazed that I can watch a movie and quote about half of it word for word by the end. I was sitting in my second grade class. The highest level reading group was in the back just behind me. I had finished my math and was simply listening to the story while pretending to be busy. When it ended, the teacher began asking students questions based on the story. Everyone was stumped by one question about how long it takes for a volcano to make an island, so I asked if I could answer. She said yes, and I did. Then she looked at the other students and said, "See, it's not that hard. Even Spodson could get it right." I remember thinking how awful she was. When people ask me today why I became an English teacher, I tell them it's out of spite. I do her job just better than she ever could. Story 17. Stop lying and making up excuses when I tried to speak up about severe abuse at home. Mothers do not do that to their children. You are making that up again when I was trying to get help for abuse. Why do you always have to be the center of attention when I had a coughing fit? You were not that sick. You can catch up by the end of the week when I was 9 and in the hospital for 3 weeks, in and out of consciousness. Story 18. An emotional third grade teacher directed angry curse words at the class multiple times. At one point, it was followed by comments indicating, "That's right. The teacher is saying bad words." I won't provide a direct quote. Story 19. My 8th grade English teacher once handed out an assignment while saying, "If you give a fool a rope, he will hang himself. Here is your rope." Story 20. At 16, I was struggling in high school and approached my psychology teacher for help. He told me I should quit in such a degrading way that it still disturbs me. I quit that day, and I don't think I can share what I would still like to do to him. Story 21. I was called to the principal's office one day unexpectedly and handed a book about overweight individuals. I was told to read it because she believed it would be in my best interest to understand how overweight women are treated. This experience led me to develop anorexia. Story 22. Not to me, but my high school English teacher once called a classmate who never did his homework a waste of space. Story 23. This was actually really funny. My favorite high school teacher, who wrote my college recommendation letter, came to my class's 40-year reunion. She was engaging everyone and being very gracious, telling them how good of students they had been. She looked me straight in the eye and, completely deadpan, said, "Who are you?" The real disappointment was when my 5th grade music teacher told my mom I had no ear, no rhythm, and would never be a musician. When I finally got to play an instrument, the bass, I practiced hard to prove her wrong. I went on to have a career in music. Story 24. I attended a magnet school, where students across all grades participated in study centers, science center, math center, etc. We were given a work packet and could set our own schedule, attending lectures to cover the material. In my sophomore year, I planned to take a month off from school to visit family in Europe. My teachers believed it was a great opportunity to broaden my horizons, immerse myself in other cultures, and learn, as long as I completed my work packet. The principal supported the idea. She called me into her office and said, "People like you who think they can just waltz through life doing as they please really annoy me. But that's okay because people like me need people like you to bust tables and mop floors for us." After that, my parents and I did not get along with her. Story 25. My second grade teacher told my parents and me in a meeting that I was an awful and stupid student who would never amount to anything. This was all because I would lose interest in her teaching. Years later, we figured out that I was just bored because I had already completed my work and needed to be in advanced classes. Story 26. It's unethical for me to put you in a class I know you will fail. Newsflash. I got into the class anyway and passed with some of the highest scores. Story 27. I jokingly mimed hanging myself with a skipping rope to my friend, away from everyone else. The teacher saw me, came over, and told me that if I was going to do that, I should go home so she wouldn't have to teach me anymore. I was 14. Story 28. I had a third grade teacher throw a chalkboard eraser at me once. It was a pretty good throw from the front of the class to the back row. I can't remember if I was sleeping or talking. Both are possible. I remember feeling caught off guard, as I rarely got in trouble, and I was embarrassed because it was public. However, I got over it quickly, probably before the end of class. It's a funny memory now, even back then. Shout out to the 90s. Story 29. You should just give up now and save the rest of us the trouble of dealing with you. I was 9 at the time. Story 30. In my senior year of high school, my art teacher told me that a self-portrait I drew was not art because I referenced a photo using the grid method. I also took the photo. Story 31. They would take away my college recommendation if my speech during my graduation included the phrase, "When I first saw this school, I was hungry and wanted chicken next door." Story 32. A professor of mine compared one of my papers to Dick Cheney going hunting and accidentally shooting his friend. It's amusing, but quite impactful. Story 33. It wasn't just said, it was done. He was the basketball coach and also my math teacher, sitting at his desk when he called me over. I looked down as he pulled up his shorts to show me. I was taken aback because I had never seen one before. This was in high school. Story 34. In social studies class, we were discussing countries and came to Niger. Someone said it was misspelled and that it was missing an R. He then remarked, "That's a conversation for my shop class." Story 35. If you are bored, I do not see any reason why you should not quit. This was said to me when I was 16 years old and questioning why I should not drop out of high school. Story 36. In first grade, my teacher called me to the front of the class to show the other students and said, "This is a dumb person because he thinks God made the animals and not evolution." I disagreed with her about animal evolution. I was bullied by her and the rest of the class until my parents pulled me out later that year. Story 37. Not a horrible thing, just too late. I saw a former teacher at a funeral, and she was happy to see me. She wanted me to know that I was an excellent student. Well, knock me down because I thought I was a brat. Story 38. When I asked if I could use the bathroom, I expected the usual response. Every teacher had previously allowed me to use the restroom because they knew I wasn't just avoiding class. The idea that a teacher would say no, especially when it was a matter of urgency, shocked me and left me speechless. I managed to hold it and rush to the bathroom after class. Story 39. Well, she ignored me because she didn't like me since I was the quiet kid. She changed the seating chart, and my new seat was at the opposite end of the classroom. Interestingly enough, in my mid-30s, I am certain I ran into her at the grocery store. I am sure she recognized me. I didn't speak to her, but I did look at her, so she knew I saw her. Story 40. During my senior year of high school, there were 2 band directors. The established one led the top and introductory concert bands, while the newer teacher directed the intermediate band. The intermediate and top bands essentially had the same name. I started the year in the intermediate band. A friend of mine convinced the experienced teacher to move me to the top band. On the day this happened, the newer teacher entered during rehearsal and expressed his frustration in front of the entire band about how I didn't deserve to be in the top band. He insisted that there were other students in the intermediate band who deserved the position more than I did. The more experienced teacher asked me to play a section of the piece we were practicing. I played it perfectly. He then continued with the rehearsal as if nothing had occurred, while the newer teacher exited abruptly and returned to the other band. Story 41. In front of the entire class, after asking if I could listen to music during the Shakespeare final, I was told, "Well, you're not good at Shakespeare anyway, so if you really want to risk failing, go ahead." I aced that final. Story 42. I was a pretty extroverted individual back in elementary school and loved to make people laugh. One day, while fooling around, my teacher yelled in front of the entire class that my voice was like a curse and too loud. I honestly don't know why, but this affected me a lot. Now, it's really hard for me to speak up. Story 43. The machine shop and welding teacher I had in high school said, "You are not doing any of the projects as you should, and I know you can do better. You are being lazy, and you need to improve." It is not the worst a teacher has said to me, mainly because I had an arrogant attitude and did not care what they said. However, that speech he gave me that day in his office made me change. A few years after graduation, I ran into him and apologized for being lazy, acknowledging that he truly helped open my eyes to how the real world would be. Story 44. I was being sarcastic, and she called me out in front of the class. It helped me understand what it means to be put in my place. Story 45. Then maybe this isn't the program for you because my grades in the majors I took were low. I was battling depression without medication when I completed those courses, and I didn't particularly enjoy them. Years later, my grades improved in the classes I did like, and my thesis received a decent grade. One individual made a comment about how I was wearing makeup. I never wore makeup to school again until my graduation. I think he mentioned liking girls with makeup, and I didn't care whether it was sarcastic or not. It just felt odd to single out my appearance. Lastly, one teacher made me admit a flaw out loud to try to embarrass me. She did this to everyone in class that day because she was upset that we didn't stop her from reading the answers to an exercise she hadn't instructed us to do. We didn't stop her because we were confused, and she was already halfway through within the 10 seconds it took us to look at our seatmates and ask each other. I couldn't choose because they all had different impacts. Story 46. I didn't have enough credits to graduate. It was a prank, and my mom and guidance counselor were in on it. This teacher got about a third of the class involved. I can appreciate the humor now, but at the time I was genuinely having a panic attack. Story 47. On the first day, my high school English teacher told me I would fail his class and become a dropout. I passed with a good grade and went on to become a professional journalist. I don't know whether to hate him or thank him. Story 48. To drop his class and change my major. That is the same teacher who handed me my degree with honors and shook my hand on stage. 2 master's degrees later in the field, I'm glad I made that decision. Story 49. I told my parents that I suggested my peer call the police if they were being bullied because I had been bullied by a classmate. The teacher clearly felt sympathy for this child despite his escalating behavior towards others as well. This was mentioned to my parents months later, indicating that the teacher wanted to make a point. I got in trouble, and I never liked the teacher from that moment on. I was 10 years old, hardly a serious offense. Story 50. Just returned home from Ireland after burying my grandmother. Anyone Irish will know how quickly they bury the dead there. They actually delayed her funeral so we could say goodbye. Where is your essay? My grandmother died. I don't care. You've been off for a week. You have no excuse. You're not going on the field trip tomorrow, and you're in detention every day this week. Story 51. You should shift to statistics. We were a computer science group. He was our statistics professor, and we disliked him. The way he taught, the way he spoke, and his condescending attitude were all frustrating. Story 52. She said I would never be able to achieve higher education. My dad believed her, and it made me incredibly insecure. Story 53. Around 10 years old, the teacher asked us what we wanted to do as a job when we grew up. Like firefighters, police officers, or astronauts. I wanted to be original, so I said, I want to be a prophet. She replied, "No, that's not possible. It's not a job." I then asked her why there was a book written about it and why people pray and work for a profit. As a result, I was excluded from the class for an hour to reflect on my actions. I was frustrated with her answer. Story 54. In the second grade, a teacher told my parents I would never know how to read and write properly and would be a lost cause by the time I reached the sixth grade. I have thought about that a lot later in my life, especially when I earned my 2 master's degrees or my Doctor of Philosophy. Story 55. I am writing exactly what he said. If I get a passing grade in his lesson, he is not a man. He added that he is a son of a bitch if I get a passing grade. Biology teacher, end of the year, I just get the passing grade. Story 56. I was bullied a lot in elementary school. When it came time for 8th grade graduation, I won a competition that meant I would be giving a speech at the ceremony. I had to write it and submit it to the teacher in charge of the student council ahead of time, and she told me I should include how much I would miss everyone and how the other students were like family. I asked, "What if I don't feel that way, and I'm just happy to be leaving the people who bully me?" She thought about it for a moment, then looked me in the eyes and said, "Well, maybe you aren't the right person to give this speech. That was almost 20 years ago, and all I can say is I resent her." Story 57. I was very excited to take chemistry in high school because I thought it seemed cool as a kid. On the very first day of that class, the teacher said, "Anyone who has questions about anything from the first unit is a fool." This completely discouraged me from the subject. I never asked questions and never passed the class. Story 58. I was told I was too overweight and awkward to play sports, despite being 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighing 150 pounds. After leaving high school, I ended up playing competitive softball and became the captain of my varsity rowing team. Sorry, I still can't square dance, Mr. O. Story 59. In art class in first grade, the teacher said something like, "Colors can be combined to create different colors. What color do you get when you mix red and yellow together?" I raised my hand along with 8 other kids. I was so excited, and she picked me. Orange. Wrong. Then she went on a 5-minute rant about how she's frustrated with kids not paying attention to her lessons, hoping that's the reason because any kid who is paying attention and gives an answer like that is completely uninformed. Then she asked the same question again, and nobody raised their hand. After a while, she picked a random kid. "Oh, orange?" That's right. It's nice to know at least one person showed up for class, unlike the last student, who can't answer a simple question. Story 60. You are a failure. You will always be a failure. I was in 6th grade in after-school detention because I missed a math homework assignment. That individual wore skin-tight acid-wash jeans with his shirt tucked in and no belt. He also had a mullet. I have a more advanced degree than him now. Story 61. In 4th grade, she said, "That makes me think you're a terrible person for not wanting to sit next to a kid who liked to put his hands on all the girls in class." Story 62. I attended my practical music exam to perform a song on guitar. The instructor looked at the CD and track length and told me, "That's too long. Play a track that is 2 minutes or less." I reminded him that he had already approved the song weeks prior and that I had been practicing and learned the solo. His response was, "Just play the main riff and go. I have better things to do." After that, I gave up on guitar and music. Story 63. Everyone in town knew my dad was obsessed with grades, so whenever my sister or I received anything below 100%, those 2 teachers would ask us if we were packed and ready to run away, or they would suggest that they never expected to see us again because we were presumably going to face severe consequences if we went home. Story 64. When I was in kindergarten, the teacher asked each student to name an animal. I confidently said gopher, thinking no one would know such an uncommon name, and ended up getting laughed at. She told me that it wasn't a real animal and that there was no animal by that name. I can't remember her exact words, but I realize now that I lost a lot of self-confidence that day. Story 65. I was sitting between 2 girls who were passing notes. I decided to be helpful and pass the notes for them so they wouldn't have to reach over my desk. One girl and I got caught, and whatever was in the note upset my teacher. The girl insisted I had nothing to do with it. I was just the one passing the note for her. He told me I was no better than a drug dealer. I was 14. Story 66. When I quit band, I was told I would never amount to anything by the band director. After I got pregnant and had a miscarriage, I continued attending school. This was with my boyfriend, whom I later married and then divorced. My teacher suggested I would probably do better if I stopped being promiscuous. However, I did not engage in promiscuous behavior. I had only slept with my boyfriend. Story 67. My third-grade teacher frequently played the piano while the class sang songs. I was told not to sing too loud because I loved it, but I couldn't sing. This was in 1981, and it definitely stayed with me. Story 68. I was asked by a teacher to drop out of the class because I was failing. I chose not to because it upset him. He was not a good teacher. Story 69. The Japanese language teacher was an elderly woman. She once told a classmate that he was a disappointment to his mother. Story 70. I was in the cafeteria during breakfast when I was 6 years old. A girl came up to me and said she didn't believe I had a severe peanut allergy and wanted me to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which could have resulted in anaphylactic shock. I don't carry an epinephrine auto-injector. Another teacher told her to leave me alone. Story 71. Not to me, but my physical education teacher called a girl in my class a fat, useless lump of lard. This was in the early 1990s. Nothing happened, and I don't think the parents even complained. Story 72. Not directly to me, but my family was very poor. When my mother was in the police report for shoplifting groceries, my fifth-grade homeroom teacher stood next to my locker chatting with my math teacher about how foolish my mother must be and that the apple probably doesn't fall far from the tree. I remember trying harder than I ever had in my entire life not to cry and act like I didn't hear them. Story 73. The numbers do not lie. I struggled with chemistry in junior college and once worked hard studying for a test. Despite my efforts, I still failed, and after class, the teacher called me to the front to criticize me for not putting in enough effort. I was already very upset and insisted that I had tried my hardest, but she did not seem to believe me. I eventually got a tutor who was an undergraduate, and he helped me excel in chemistry for the nationals. Story 74. American history teacher. You all are not paying attention and don't seem to care about learning something that can help you prevent past mistakes. I actually found a renewed interest in history after such honesty. I love history and politics because of him. Mr. Berger, you are the greatest of all time. Story 75. My grade 9 teacher said that I was becoming a nuisance. He went on mental health leave after that. Story 76. That I shouldn't even bother looking at college. I ended up graduating from college magna cum laude, and I am now considering a master's degree, along with law school at some point. Story 77. When I was 11, my dad was dying of cancer. I was hopeful he would overcome it. I had been acting up in class, so my teacher asked me to stay after class. She sat me down and told me he was likely going to die. He passed away a few months later. She was a hateful and unhappy woman. Story 78. Mrs. Tyndall, a 7th-grade teacher, used to make fun of my clothes for being too big or too small. They were hand-me-downs from a church charity, and she knew it. She did this at least once a week, and more than once I cried in her classroom. She was unkind. Story 79. Not me, but a classmate took out his phone after class. The teacher thought it was his and grabbed the student by the neck. We had no French teacher for 4 months. Story 80. I was on a school camp and received a phone call home because I was refusing to participate in activities I could not do due to my disability. For example, they wanted me to go rock climbing, which is difficult when I am almost completely paralyzed from the waist down. Story 81. For context, I was going through the loss of my father at the age of 10. My 4th-grade teacher, Mrs. Klein, said that I was a spoiled brat and would never amount to anything. Fast forward 20 years later, I am getting ready to graduate with a Juris Doctor degree paid for by my part-time job, which I am also getting promoted at the end of the month. At my full-time job, I am getting promoted when I get back from vacation, and I have a fully paid-off house that I paid for myself. Story 82. My teacher tapped on my hand, which was covered in pen because I often draw on my left hand, and said, "I don't ever want to see this again." She was my first favorite teacher, even though many students disliked her, and later I went to my fourth favorite teacher. In my head, I thought, "Shut up, you old lady. Don't tell me what to do. You're my teacher, not my mom. Just get on with the lesson." She has been teaching for over 30 years and has taught most of my uncles, aunts, and my dad. I draw on my hand to cope with anxiety, which I experience frequently for no apparent reason, along with other issues I won't mention. Story 83. I was sick in the 6th grade. We had just moved to this town. Took the doctors a while to figure out what was wrong. They thought maybe I just didn't want to go to school, but I missed a lot of classes. The teacher said, "You are missing too much school. There is nothing wrong with you." However, the doctor felt there was something wrong. They admitted me to the hospital and conducted several tests. I was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. I gave myself an injection 2 weeks after I was discharged from the hospital. Story 84. The vice president of my high school handed me my graduation certificate and whispered in my ear, "I never thought you would get this far." Joke's on him. That was my peak. Story 85. Not choosing me for the school musical is something I will never forget or forgive. I wanted it more than anything. Story 86. I experienced a strange anxiety episode where my mind went blank, and I suddenly couldn't finish the worksheet we were all working on. Normally, I would be the first person done. I quietly informed my teacher that I felt something was wrong and was having trouble completing the assignment. She became annoyed and told me in front of the whole class to stand outside and finish the worksheet while everyone else moved on. There was no offer of support, just the instruction to go outside. At that moment, I was completely overwhelmed because I had never gotten in trouble at school. I stood outside, frozen with anxiety, feeling like my brain was throbbing when my crush walked by and said, "Glad I caught you. I'm moving. Today's my last day. I'm being picked up right now, bye." It was almost like a scene from a movie. I struggled to process what he just said, then blanked out and ran to the bathroom, starting to sob. I was now having a full-blown panic attack, something I had never experienced before. I called my mom from the bathroom and begged her to come get me. "Please, I can't move. I can't breathe. I need to get out of here right now." Without hesitation, she showed up immediately and got me out of there. It was my worst day ever. I don't understand why that teacher was so harsh when I was clearly scared. Story 87. My very first teacher when I was 5 was a real piece of work. She had a very small round mat in the coat room that she called the spot. She would send you there if you did anything wrong. A little backstory. This was a school in the wealthy part of town. My family did not live in that area, but my grandparents did, and they got me accepted into the supposedly good school. One day, Miss Lowe, that name will forever be scarred into my brain, decided to send me to the spot because I interrupted her to ask to use the bathroom. I had my hand raised, and she was actively ignoring me. She made eye contact with me and had a smug grin 3 times before I blurted out that I needed the toilet. She immediately sent me to the spot. 15 minutes later, the lunch bell rang, and as she walked past the coat room, she stopped, looked at me crying because I had wet myself, smiled, and kept walking. She left me there sitting in my own urine for the next 45 minutes. Once she finally came back, she made me eat my packed lunch very quickly. A Vegemite and cheese sandwich and a mandarin. She threw my 200,000 cookies in the bin, and then dragged me painfully to the office, squeezing my wrist as hard as she could. Once at the office, she proceeded to lie through her teeth, saying that I refused to leave the playground to use the bathroom and that I was a disgusting child who had no place at that school. I had to spend the rest of the day in the office until my parents could pick me up. She lied to my parents and they punished me. Once she realized she could manipulate my parents and get away with doing horrible things, the abuse got progressively worse. Eventually, Child Protective Services got called because I drew a stick figure of a princess bowing to a prince. Apparently that was deemed sexually explicit. I remember the principal yelling at me, saying it was a disgusting picture. The picture was literally me trying to draw Disney's 1973 Robin Hood. As people, I liked Maid Marian's dress and crown, because, of course, I was a typical 5-year-old little girl of the 90s who liked anything princess, pink, and sparkly. My parents were investigated, but nothing was found at home. I had to go to a child therapist, and the only thing she found was that my teacher was mean and a liar. I refused to talk about what I had been through. My parents finally pulled me out of that school, and I didn't have another bad teacher until we moved to a new city when I was 10. I suppose I should thank that teacher. The trauma she inflicted on me caused me to be hypervigilant to the point where I remember everything that has ever happened to me since then. It was useful in school, but as an adult, I now avoid human contact because I have experienced so much pain and trauma throughout my life that it's just constantly circulating in my memories. Summary: I was abused by my first teacher, who lied and manipulated my parents into punishing me for the abuse she was inflicting. Eventually, Child Protective Services were called because I drew stick figures of a princess and a prince, which led to me being put into child therapy and finally being removed from the school. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.